It's not something normal. It's 5 kids absolutely battering each other. It's mental.
Filming House of the Dragon is no easy feat. You know we're going to get into the intense birthing scene, the brothel, all of the intimate scenes that made the actors extremely uncomfortable, and how a little scene like having lunch can last for 4 long, brutal days. Number 1. Physically and emotionally, one of the most difficult scenes to film. Paddy Considine uses the word brutal when describing what the cast went through that day, especially Sian Brooke.
It was a massively long day and a very emotional scene. It was more emotional than what's finally caught.
They worked on a closed set that day. Nobody who wasn't supposed to be there was there, and it was mostly a room full of women. The scene shows Queen Aemma trying to give birth to her and King Viserys' child, but she ends up being forced into a fatal procedure with the hopes of saving the child. This was a massively physical day for Sian Brooke. There were at least 14 different takes and 14 dresses handmade specifically for this scene. Brutal is definitely a word for it. Number 2. There's bound to be a few. Learning a new skill is difficult, especially if it involves fighting with a dangerous weapon. In this case, it was Fabian Frankel and Matt Smith sword fighting during a rehearsal. In an interview with Variety, Fabian talks about how Matt accidentally sliced himself on the forehead.
Got me right on the forehead, and I've got a right big forehead, so it was a pain in the ass.
They ended up getting drinks afterward and celebrating the fact that they both made it out of their first day remotely unscathed. Number 3. It can be pretty intimidating reading your own intimacy scenes as a 17-year-old. That's right, Emily Carey was 17 when she first read the script. In this instance, we're referring to a scene where she is bathing King Viserys, and another where they're together in bed. It scared me because at that point, I still hadn't met Paddy. I didn't know how much of a joy he was and how easy he was going to make the scene. And all I saw was, a 47-year-old man and me. I was a bit concerned. It also helped that they had a great intimacy coordinator to choreograph the scenes for them. Number 4. Speaking of intimacy, this has a lot. Millie Alcock found this scene to be pretty intense, or gnarly rather. There were extras who we had just met who were like 69ing for 12 hours. It's pretty gnarly. We felt pretty overdressed because everyone else was nude. The director, Claire Kilner, made sure nobody saw any of the brothel stuff until the moment they were shooting. So that was our first time walking through the brothel, and he's guiding her through the room with all of these other bodies. So that was quite shocking. You're like, this is kind of weird and silly. Number 5. Did you know a lot of the night scenes were shot in broad daylight?
Here they are together, both having lost someone, both grieving. The chemistry between them is as strong as before.
Particularly, the scenes shot in Driftmark in episode 7 were later adjusted and color corrected to look like they were shot at night. Why did they do it like this? Apparently, Laena's funeral was one of the first scenes they filmed in Cornwall, and the weather would not cooperate in the slightest. It was shot over 5 days, and we had everything the weather could throw at us. Director of photography, Fabian Wagner, was pulling his hair out, trying to make different scenes look consistent and continuous. HBO even responded to a fan's tweet complaining about how bad the lighting was by saying it was an intentional creative decision. Number 6. You'd be surprised how grueling some of these simple scenes are.
And it's like day 4 of like a scene when you're having lunch. That stuff gets a bit mad, doesn't it?
Oftentimes, they would spend days shooting simple scenes like conversations, or yes, just having lunch. It's an understatement to say that actors were getting pretty antsy.
You do get that sense of did we ever leave this place?
You go a bit cuckoo.
Number 7. Yeah, not as fun as you would think. It was basically like being on a 20-foot high bucking bronco, but for all day. Once they were up and strapped in it, they'd just leave them there for hours at a time.
There's a guy with a remote control sort of moving you around.
They had massive wind machines blowing into their faces the entire time they were up there.
You're strapped in, they fire a load of wind and rain at you.
Number 8. What better way to introduce you to the Targaryens than a tournament?
I thought, it's going to be in a field with some trees around it. And maybe there'll be some flags.
Yeah, far from it. Jim Clay, the production designer, showed up with a drawing of a massive colosseum.
Should never have listened.
There were so many factors that went into play when building it, especially when it came to how safe it was for the performers.
You don't want the horses to hurt themselves, you don't want the stuntmen to hurt themselves.
The Royal Box was a completely separate design in itself.
I wanted that to be the dominant part of the arena. It was quite a costly thing, that box.
Number 9. This time it was Matt Smith who had an issue with it. The Game of Thrones franchise is known for its explicit content, especially in the bedroom. When asked if Matt Smith's character has a lot of intimate scenes, his response was, yeah, slightly too much if you ask me. When filming those scenes, he would find himself asking, do we really need another one? To which the response was always, yes, we do. He definitely wasn't a big fan of performing in that way, but he also wanted to honor the world that George R.R. Martin created. I guess you have to ask yourself, what are you doing? Are you representing the books, or are you diluting the books to represent the time we're living in? And I actually think it's your job to represent the books truthfully and honestly as they were written. Number 10. Especially when wearing uncomfortable made-for-TV armor, Graham McTavish does say that the horse you get on matters when it comes to how comfortable your ride will be that day.
If you get a good horse, you can sit on with them with anything.
But one thing that is consistently unpleasant is getting on and off the horse while wearing the armor, which was made of super stiff plastic, by the way.
I've got to be honest, getting on and off the horse in armor, it can be tricky.
Apparently, the kilts are much more comfortable when doing scenes on horseback. Number 11. We're talking about Millie Alcock and Emily Carey. They, of course, were replaced by Olivia Cooke and Emma Darcy, but they appeared together in many episodes before that.
I think it was important and key to show both of these young women in their early years.
Because of their strong bond in real life, the scenes where Rhaenyra had to be angry with Alicent were a burden for Millie to perform. She explains, I adore Em, and I feel very protective of her, and like her big sister. I don't like being angry at her in real life, and I didn't want to pretend. Number 12. So much detail went into all of these mementos.
There are all these wonderful objects and mementos from his voyages, these legendary 9 voyages.
The crew gave Jim Clay and Claire Nia Richards, the set decorator, all the information they have on the sea snake and let them have free reign on the designs.
The detail is unbelievable. It's so beautiful.
The team had never designed anything like this before, and everything was made completely from scratch.
The concept's coming and you look at some of them and you think, how the hell we're going to do that?
Every piece was influenced by things already made around the world. Which details did you notice when you first watched it? Number 13. He really can't catch a break. While doing some stunt work in Portugal, Matt Smith suffered a pretty serious injury to the disc in his neck, for which he faults his massive armored helmet for. He pushed through the pain to continue shooting, but it probably didn't help, as months after the shooting wrapped, he was still in physical therapy for it. It's a pain in the neck, literally, physically, and metaphorically. House of the Dragon serves up powerful, intense birthing scenes, colosseums built from nothing, actors pushing through injuries and extremely awkward scenes, and horseback riding in bulky, plastic armor. Which scene do you think was the most difficult to capture?